Hey you guys, oh, the sun's coming out. It is March 16th, so it's been a full month since the Valentine's Day massacre freeze that swept through Houston, killed so much. And the reason I waited a full month is because I remember from the 2018 freeze that there is so much that changes that you don't know, that you come to find out is still alive or is dead, and just all happens in those weeks after. So that's why I waited, and this video, rather than being like a full garden tour update, we're really just gonna visit the trees so you can see what I did to protect them and how they did. So we can start with this Satsuma right here, which I let die. It went completely unprotected, not even a sheet over the top. It's because it had a lot of citrus greening in it, and so that was good to just let that one go from the start detaching. It still has a shade of green in the stem, which is pretty common for how citrus dies. And I'll leave it up here, another month before I come in. I'm excited to plant something new anyway. The sweet almond verbena, I thought had fully frozen to the ground, but we have buds up on this stem. So this was another one fully unprotected, sweet almond verbena. On the plum tree here, the Gulf Beauty plum had already started blooming and leafing out, and it got hit really hard by the freeze. So there's a lot of damage, but it found new buds deeper, lower on the bark, on the trunk. And so it's pushing back out, and now we've got a good blossom this year with Bruce and Beauty at the same time. So hopefully they can pollinate each other, and we shall see if I get some plums. So this kumquat has a very old trunk. This is a 20-year-old tree. It came from Levy Park, was transplanted, and so it's been in the garden for 6 years at least. I mounted and nothing more, so this got banked, and this is a really good example of pushing just above. So if you look right there, our camera will focus even a little higher. We're getting buds well above, or maybe right at the tip of where the mulch line was. That's a bud right there on the underneath side. The iconic entryway citrus, the Shamuti sweet orange, it had some citrus greening showing up in it, and so it got really low on the list. Did light heaters for it the second night, so it went down to 19, and then it probably went close to 12 before the heaters got lit on Monday night. I do not see a lot of the fungus that shows up in the other trees when I really know they're dead, and there's a chance the bark would still scratch green or still scratches green. And so yeah, there's technically some life in it, but some really severe damage. It will be interesting to see if it pushes a bud or not. Right behind me is the N33 Navel, and it got a treatment that I think is really successful and something that I learned a lot from. As you can see, it's already set quite a few fruit and is still blooming to set some more, really nice and fragrant. But it got coppiced, so it got cut down preemptively, and that was a really huge part of triggering all this new bud growth, so that it didn't have to get damaged first and then come back out. What was different about this one versus others is that it only got mulch. It did not get any of the water buckets around the base to release heat, but the mulch itself was still sufficient to release some heat from its activity, and it got covered with all of its cut branches, a lot of which are right there, and then it got covered with a tarp on top of that. A big reason that tarps are bad is because they heat up so quickly, but with all of that leaf surface area and that actual distance, because it was probably 1.5 feet higher, that really helped to buffer some of that change, and I just left the plastic on for probably 3 days till it was above freezing. So it did also have a good lesson in the splitting. So if you'll see these big cracks in damaged bark, the damaged bark does not mean that the branch is a loss. So here's major splits. I don't know if the camera is getting them well, but you can see it's going to push new growth right there, and it is going to heal those wounds over time. It did have a lot more leaves, and those were green for a long time, but then senesced, and now this is the point where it's deciding to come back from. It's kind of like the tree has to re-establish its integrity, its structure, and so there is a shrinking that happens afterwards with all of the damage. But it was really cool to watch in this one, where it did shrink back a good bit, but then it's also coming back, past where there was clearly damage further down. Over here we have the Changshu kumquat, and it got buried in mulch as well, nice and deep, It got no cut and cover. So unlike the one we just saw, this had its full top opened, and it really showed, well, in the speed at which it has come back, it showed at least that it might have been a little bit better to cut and cover. I would have been able to protect a little higher because it wouldn't have been too hard to cover it. It is also an experiment in the mulch itself was this high, and after I took it off, within a week I could see a discoloration on these stems where it was green to brown. And so I went ahead and I cut these, and I cut this one and this one as an experiment to see if it would help them to push buds sooner or better or higher. Here's a bud here right at where the mulch was for the banking, and here's that fungus that's really my indicator of when the bark's not going to make it. It's kind of a peachy color. But what we've got is over here on the other side, you know, pushing out at the exact same height in the exact same way. So really, it didn't matter cutting back. It did not improve the rate of budding out at all. But this will be back. This is, you know, got a lot of energy. This being buried, you can imagine fully buried, is really helping to drive all of that healing, and there's just tons of buds and new growth that's going to come out of the center there. This Brown Select Satsuma tree was treated the exact same way as the Changshu. It was banked with mulch, but it was not cut or covered, and again, totally should have cut and covered it. Could have saved so much more. Right now, as it is, our death line is right here. That I had these little rootstock suckers that literally were just green, you know, stubs because they had been chewed off by a rabbit or I had cut them off. And so I went and grafted onto them as soon as I saw the rootstock pushing, which was like 2 weeks ago. And then after that, I did see the pushing above the graft right there on the stem. You can see a pretty nice shoot coming out, and then there's one even higher. So the Satsuma for sure will be back just through those two buds, and I might get a few others because I put a Shiranui and the Dobashi Beni and the Okitsu all down there, so might have to share some light. That's kind of random. Found the duck's new nest, and there's actually one out of the nest but not broken. Weird. These crazy ducks. This Satsuma got the exact same treatment as the others. It was banked but not cut, not covered, not anything. The mulch was able to protect the lowest branches, and they are rebudding. All of the top is dead. I had to put back up the fence because the rabbits will chew on citrus like nobody's business. Last one that was banked and uncovered, well, maybe not the last one, but almost, is this same kumquat as before, Miwa from Levy Park, so a very old trunk, very old tree. And what we have is buds pushing pretty quickly in the banked area. Banked zone was about here, maybe a little higher, pushing up. But we also have some cool feedback as far as look at how quick they were to make buds, whereas the 10-plus-year-old trunk is, you know, unable to push a bud at this point, even though this area was clearly protected. And that just, you know, tells you to wait. If you have a really old trunk and it's, you know, been a long time, just really wait. It might take a while for that bud to form and to push through all of that bark. Behind me is the Pakistan mulberry. I had such impressive specimens, and it's all dead, but not the whole tree. This tree got banked, and so we have new buds pushing down here. They again are pushing on the youngest trunks, rather than the fatter one over here. It's probably just a little bit further behind, and it will just explode through these growth points, but it will never be the same. To imagine having to, you know, cut somewhere in this range and have that rot out, it's a pretty big hit, pretty tough loss, but at least it will grow back and we can kind of guide its process. A pretty sad one that I haven't really fully processed yet is my Florida Prince peach tree. So Florida Prince was, you know, it's a super low chill hour, super early peach. And so not only was it fully blooming, setting fruit again, but it had already set fruit back in like November, December, just, you know, leaves out all over the place. So it was hit very hard, and so hard that it actually killed it. I can scratch test anywhere on the bark, and this tree has no life. Now, all of the blueberries got zapped pretty hard. A lot of them were blooming or had fresh buds, so they got hit, but they were able to find new buds and recover, bloom again. So blueberries already look great. And another great one, or a successful protecting, was with this Kishu seedless mandarin right here. So this one got coppiced slightly. Really, it just got, trimmed. It was probably about 3 or 4 feet taller. But this one had water buckets around the base. So not only the black one, the white one, and a third. And then it got all of its branches, lots of good insulative material placed inside, and it got covered by a tarp. So it was just probably that's the highest you can do for an off-grid protection without electricity or heat or anything. That really showed it. It was able to, maintain all of these branches really far from the water source, really far from everything else. It's blooming like crazy, setting a bunch of fruit. The bees are happy. So that was a really successful protection for going down to 12 degrees. And over here is another unsuccessful protection, or another pretty big loss. You'll see I have already started coming back in with tropicals. Those were just banked in the garage. Right back here, we have a Louisiana Sweet Hamlin sweet orange, and it got water buckets around the base. It got its branches cut and covered, but what happened was the plastic blew off and failed. So there was no banking and there was no really good plastic over the top. Now this tree is definitely not fully dead. It will probably hang on through this bud, which can push another bud out at the trunk further down. But the reason I cut, this had really bad stem splitting, and you'll see the fungus that I'm talking about. I haven't stayed on top of my Elmer's gluing, but that fungus with the peachy color would just rip through the whole thing. It got infected real bad, and so I cut back pretty far. All of the trunk damage had major splits, and I just knew it wouldn't be able to push buds, so I wanted to give it a better chance. That's the lowest split right there. And brand new to me right here, this is the bud I was talking, I hadn't even seen it yet, but that bud in that bark area can be, the new tree. That'll push and regrow. Pineapple guavas also got rocked. I really thought they were further gone, more damaged, but they're pushing buds all over the trunk now a month later. It was a really good one not to rush. All right, so this kumquat right here had 2 buckets of water and a mulch banking up to about this level, and I went and did this cut post freeze, and I did it because I just couldn't handle that energy, just being around the death, the feeling of death. Super regret it though, because this kumquat is pushing buds. Come and see. This kumquat is pushing buds well above where it was banked. So that's really huge feedback. And so I lost, what still had integrity, super old, thick bark. There's another bud right there, but it will be back, just smaller, shorter, not a tree you can walk under like it used to be. We'll rebuild, but definitely a good lesson in waiting. Don't cut, just be really patient and see what happens. All right, and now we have the first of the avocados, and the avocados got the heater to protect them. So this tree, we'll get up closer, had the tiki torch, which you can see down there, sitting in there. That's probably just a replacement, but shooting heat up into multiple pots that had a lot of thermal mass, that has a lot of weight to it, which would then radiate the heat into the area. And then it was wrapped with just a frost cloth, just enough to block wind and try and keep that heat in a little longer. So it was able to protect a lot. We have really good buds pushing all the way up the trunk, all the way into this area. Still really good buds. Still really good buds. Still really good buds. There's another budding out. All the way up to here. So that's probably 7 or 8 feet off the ground. There's really good buds over there. There's really good buds coming out right here. So yeah, this is a good, yes, it worked. The heater sent out a lot of heat, and it wasn't too hard for me to restart it every 8 hours. That's how long they last. And yeah, this is the best avocado tree of all of them right now as far as regrowth. The Calocarpa longissima is an awesome plant, but it froze to the ground, of course, and just let it, because I knew it would be back. I just had maybe one bag of leaves tossed on the trunk, but you can see the new buds forming, and it'll be back quickly. The osmanthus went unprotected except for a couple bags at the base. All of the new growth was fully killed, and it was able to push from just a little bit further back on the stem. So it's already regrowing well, but just so fortunate versus the sweet almond verbena, which is down to ground level. Here is the cherry of the Rio Grande. This was protected with cutting off the top, burying it in its own branches, and then covering it with a good plastic layer, and that was successful. And now we go and see another avocado. So this avocado had 2 heaters. You can see them right down there. And it had a much bigger volume than the one that was most successful. Here, I had the frost cloth wrapping all the way out, even including this branch, everything down low. And this one is coming back more slowly. It does have some good regrowth. You'll see right there. So, over a month later, that little pin bud right there, the red one, that's in a position where it could take over and be the new trunk. This is one of my favorite protection success stories. So this is a blood orange, and I remember marking that it was already after midnight when I covered it. So this is Sunday night. The low that night was 19. It was probably mid-20s at this point, already well below freezing, and I hadn't gotten around to it. But I was like, oh my gosh, the blood orange. So I ran over, I coppiced it, I cut off the top, and what I did is I shoved all the branches inside, but I had a bunch of these black trash bags. They were actually all right here, and they were full of like a pine needle-y, leafy compost, and actually not even fully compost, but they had a lot of organic matter in there and a lot of moisture that had already frozen. I remember opening them up going, oh my gosh, it was like icicles. But I just tore the bags open on one side, and all of the main branches, I just shoved the plastic over the top of them so that any heat radiating upward would be caught by the plastic bags. And it was amazing how much it was able to protect. Now that wasn't it. After I covered it in all of the bags of leaves, I also think I threw other branches on top, and then I covered the whole thing with a blanket, not a tarp. Blanket first, then I had a tarp, but it blew off. But essentially I just was like, anything and everything, pile it on top, and it's come back really strong. So yeah, I'm excited. Let me show you guys all this great new growth from undamaged branches, very little splitting, good replacement central leaders. But I think most of it was because there was life and moisture in those bags, maybe that hadn't fully frozen, that the freeze itself was kind of releasing, but also that biological activity. But just shoving it on top of the ends of the branches is what did it. Right here we have the Everhard navel, and it was one where I really wanted to protect it. So it got water at the base, it got a mulch banking around the water, then it got coppiced pre-freeze, and then it got covered with just plastic, so just a tarp. It did get a good bit of damage further than what I had cut, so I've been reducing the volume, and that was mainly, if you'll see, like major bark splitting here. You can see that right there is pretty major crack. All this out here was green. It had a lot more green, and it took that energy away from that green, saying that the integrity had been compromised, and now it's finding its threshold and pushing buds and leafing back out. So it does have, full momentum. It's really fragrant, blooming, gonna set a few fruit even. So it'll be back quickly, but there was a good bit of damage even underneath all that tarp, and even with the water radiating some heat upwards. All of my figs made it. This one was banked with mulch. The other Osborne Prolific wasn't, so it didn't really matter too much, but they're all leafing out just great, which is exciting. I did see others around town, maybe a little younger, that didn't. I think the mulch in the area has a lot to do with it. Pomegranates were hit really hard. I never did anything for the pomegranates. I probably should have banked the base, but that one's dead. The one that was right over there by the Kishu seedless we just saw, it has new growth coming out right up against the Kishu seedless where it got banked by the leaves and branches. As you can see, the tomatoes survived the freeze just fine. I didn't even cover them. And no, they got replanted. So I had planted them in an earlier video. I just took them out of the hay bales and then replanted them after the freeze had passed. But right behind, back here, we have another orange tree. So this sunburst mandarin got cut, coppiced, and covered, but not well enough to protect it from way more severe damage. So I didn't coppice at this level. I coppiced probably 2 or 3 feet higher, and it had buckets, but it just wasn't enough heat radiating up, or maybe this tree is just a little too tender. It's splitting here, but also pushing growth past it, and there was way more leaf surface area that was green for a while that had to reduce down because of getting partially damaged. So it's going to come back more out of the core with some main branches that start taking over, and that'll be good for the future to have really good low branches that can get banked and resprout whenever we get the next really hard freeze. We had severe leaf damage on the palmetto blueberry. It was out early, and then my dwarf bottle brush is down to the ground. It got banked, and so there are buds at the base. You can kind of see one off to the right side there. And same with this kumquat. It was banked, and there's our new beginning right there. So barely pushing after just over a month at the base of the citrus. So good to be patient. As you can see, I had a lot of things to cover. So the Mars sweet orange here, I really wanted to protect well. It got the water buckets, it got banked with mulch around the base, and it got buried in its own branches, so it was coppiced pre-freeze, and it got covered in a black plastic pond liner. Super thick, what, 8 mil plastic. Even though it looks great now, it actually was damaged below the black plastic, and a lot has shrunk since. So like this kind of dieback right here, there was a lot more of that kind of splitting and dieback. So this branch has major splits that I probably need to come and fill in with glue to help it, but it is pushing. This growth will do a lot of good healing, but that branch got damaged, and there was another one on the backside, but just so much energy coming up through from what was protected. So a lot to be grateful for. And then over here we have the Ujukitsu and some chickens. Ujukitsu was another one that was coppiced, banked, and covered. It had an interesting structure where it had this lowest branch, and this was really quick to regrow because it already had good, terminal buds, and it's been super slow to push. So I think it might have gotten a little damage, but it is pushing on these thicker trunks further up. So it will be back. Right behind the Ujukitsu, we have the fantastic avocado, which had 2 heaters and placed in, these 2 areas. A good amount of mulch actually banked below the heaters, and the wrap was probably at about 6 feet high. Well, it actually was this high because that's how the leaves are protected. This is really cool to see. So the leaves that were out on the edge, branches too, got enough protection, which is just cool, which is great. And hopefully we have some really good buds out of this main trunk coming soon, because this is still alive. I don't know if you can see all the way out there how epic. That branch was bent down that the sheet hung on top of, and so it was some of the warmest area was where that was. But those are buds pushing. That's 8 feet, probably 9 feet off the ground on avocado, which is great. So it's gotta figure it out, compartmentalize, and then I'll know where to cut back after a little while longer. But it came out really good. While we're talking about avocados, here is a seedling avocado that didn't get heaters. It just got banked really deep. So you see all the mulch right here. It was buried a full 3 feet up, and it is coming back from everything that was under the bank. There was a good clear kill line right at about at the top of the mulch, and there are some really strong buds coming in right at that height level. Now we got to go to a really sad one. And mention that I'm planting now Monstera in the garden, getting rid of the houseplants, see what the Monstera does. But Japanese blueberry, Elaeocarpus, apparently is not hardy down to 12 degrees. And I actually ran the heater because I knew it wasn't, it was, on the fence. So I ran the heater the second night, but I didn't have anything to really contain the heat, and it just was not enough. So this one's scratching brown everywhere. It's not pushing buds at the base. So I have to come back to this level to really fully show you how much of a loss that was, that big old Japanese blueberry. So they're, you know, plants that were in everyone's landscape, and, you know, just a tough loss for the wildlife who enjoy the blueberries, and I really enjoyed the aesthetic, just that evergreen with a little bit of color, and it's a nice tree. So sad to see it go. I did nothing from my bay laurel tree. It did lose some leaves, but the main trunks are okay, and possibly that's from just being a little bit under a canopy covered, but didn't even get banked or mulched. The white sapote is one of my bigger success stories and something I really enjoyed learning from. I built a little quick temporary greenhouse over the white sapote because it had already set fruit. I was not able to save all of the fruit, so a lot of the fruit was lost on branches that had to be cut, or just, you know, it couldn't keep everything. But I do still have fruit on the white sapote. So I'm excited about these. There was a much larger one that somebody went and took off, so that's kind of annoying, but there's still fruit left on the tree. Behind the loquat, we have a cocktail grapefruit. It did not get banked, so there was no mulch added. It did get a slight cut, so, you know, 4 feet off the top, and then it got wrapped up against the water tank, and it had a heater lit from underneath to kind of both heat the water and, you know, shoot some heat out into the tree. Really severe bark splitting. So here on the outside, like, you can just follow that line all the way up and see it over there. I mean, really severe. But it did not have a lot of dead leaves right away. So all of these leaves were green up until about 2 weeks ago, when it finally decided that it had to abort them. All of this was green as well. So it looked really good for a while, but now it's shrinking back down. So I'm totally okay with that decision. Definitely encourage it. It'll probably be somewhere in this range of those buds, and we'll get it growing back. That's a Suriname cherry, and I let it go. I just said it hadn't produced fruit. The other one had. Didn't even try and protect it. And then Republic of Texas was a pretty big loss for me. All it got was a banking. I really wish I'd cut and covered it, but I didn't. So the banking was not very high, probably only 2 feet high, and I do not believe it is coming back. That's my first major loss of a citrus that I did not want to lose, because this was a really great spot, you know, established underneath the canopy and big enough to still produce fruit with just a little pocket of light there. So that's one I wish I could have back. You'll see I let the curry tree freeze to the ground. That should be root hardy and should be coming back. I just planted a new avocado. So this is my amazing keep the avocado from, you know, getting compacted soil. I just needed to plant something in response to that freeze and say, you're not going to stop me. I'm going to keep growing. And this is a seedling from Opal over on the other side. So rather than the named cultivars, which I am also excited about, I'm going to have more of the unnamed seedlings still producing fruit, hopefully good fruit, and give it a lot of good love here. Good microclimate. We'll see how it does. And the bromeliads spent the freeze in the garage. Over here on the back side is a star fruit that did not get protected in time. Basically, this was last after the cocktail grapefruit. It had already been low 20s before I did anything, even banking mulch. I did throw a tarp over it, but this tank, unlike the other, was only half full of water. So just not as much heat to radiate, no signs of life as of yet. Right here I have a Murcott honey mandarin. The split, if you follow my finger down, it went all the way down into the rootstock. And because the splitting was really severe on this one, I cut off main branches right here and up here right away. And how you can't really tell based on how fast the leaves turn brown or what they do, whether or not the bark is still good or going to push. But I do think this tree is going to be able to heal those cracks, is going to make it. You can see there's just a lot of new growth pretty much everywhere, even up here near the top. There's a lot of good buds. I mean, all right, just a few more, bear with me. So right over here, we have a pixie mandarin. It was treated the same as the last one. It had water buckets. It had not mulch, but hay, you know, like leaves, pine needles, banked up high, densified with its own foliage cut from the top, and then wrapped in a tarp. it did get some severe damage that did not show up right away. So this is where it was a good sign. This kind of coloration, I think, is really good. If your citrus look like this, well, obviously you're probably seeing buds, but where it's green stem, brown leaves, that's okay. That's a good thing. Sorry for bouncing around so much, but you can see all of this green stem is pushing bud. And these leaves, even though they, fried on the tree and never dropped, were still alive down in the stems underneath. So pushing just about everywhere, even up here at the tips, there's some good buds pushing. We can jump back here. This is Nagel's seedless kumquat. This one did not get covered. And I'm pretty sad about not covering it. It was only banked with bags of leaves, and it's got massive dead sections in between the green. However, I am still holding out hope for this tree. This will probably be the last one to push of all that I expect to push. There is still green in the trunk, and I do like that it's creating that clear barrier boundary between what's alive and what isn't. But it's over a month. I have no buds. It's had no green. I should have thrown a dang something over the top of it. Could have given it a degree of difference. So right over here we have the starfruit that's been my most productive starfruit. I really love this tree, and I went ahead and coppiced it, cut it down hard. It got covered with it was an insulation and this bucket at first, just kind of wrapped tightly but airtight. And I decided that wasn't enough, so on the coldest night I upped to the bigger barrel so that I could put a warm water jug inside. And I'm not sure if it was better or worse, if it radiated enough heat through the whole night, but there was water right beside it and it's survived. However, it has not pushed a new good bud on the main trunk, which is kind of sad. So if you look, you can see all of this green growth is just coming off of this whisper stem off to the side, and what I really want to see is a bud off of this stem that can take over a central leader and be the new tree. So hopefully that happens soon, because otherwise it's this spindly guy and that's not the best form. Now this was one of my fails. This was the Suriname cherry and the cherimoya, and basically I built this just so I could cover them. So this had a big old piece of carpet that was big enough to cover them both, just something I had on site, and I did not run the heater the first night. So I'm not sure if that's what did it, or it was that I ran the heater the second night and I knew it was too much heat. I really didn't want to. I wanted to run this candle, but it wouldn't light. And so I ran the tiki torch for the 12 degrees. It probably made it like, I don't know, 80, 90 degrees. As you can see, the cherimoya is coming back. So this was never covered with mulch or anything. This is just enough heat from that heater to keep it going. And so is the Suriname cherry. You can see that leaf right in there coming back from the base. So hopefully it grows quickly and comes back strong, but I could have done a better job protecting it. This Changshu kumquat, it got banked right around these two water buckets and nothing else, banked to about that height, and that's where it's coming back from. So lots of growth, but sad to lose the really that main trunk central leader. I really liked it. Oh well. Right back in the corner is a starfruit that shows no signs of life from just being covered with leaves and a black plastic trash bag. We have strawberry guava right here that are dead, and I didn't care to do anything for them. There was a bucket of water there already. And then this is a Bloom Sweet grapefruit that I also did nothing, well, at the very last moment, I threw a jug of water and a little towel around the base. But basically I let it go. It was one of the last on the list because I didn't really care for the fruit, and it's definitely dead as a doornail. You can see, or I can see, the fungus infecting the trunk at the base. Right here is the lemon tree that was located up against that water tank. I did not cover it at all. It was a seedling lemon. It had been in the ground 7 years and never flowered, never set fruit, was tired of waiting. Also thinking, it's less cold hardy than something else that could take its place. So I just dug up the lemon tree from the base. Didn't even care to give it a chance. And then right back here we have the Okitsu Satsuma. And what is amazing, the difference, so the Bloom Sweet right over there, it has that orange fungal in the base, and this one got the same treatment. Very last of the list, it had that little gallon water jug of hot water, hottest I could make, placed underneath and then wrapped in a towel. And this is a testament to why you grow Satsuma mandarins right here, right over where the water would have freezed and radiated. It was just kind of wrapped like this. Really a testament to the Satsumas and their ability, and I'm just super grateful that this one's coming back. All right, you guys, home stretch. So this had water in the bucket and water on this side as well, and it was banked in mulch up to right about this level right here. So the mulch was the real saving grace, and it is setting fruit, but we don't want to allow it to, so I'm going to take those off and just let it focus on making new leaves. And then over here is a pretty good success story. This is the other Kishu seedless. It had these tote tubs on either side, fully, filled with water, then banked with mulch on the interior, just like mulch dumped on everything. Didn't care if I broke branches, I just wanted to put a ton of mulch on it. And then I buried it in all of its own branches, because there was, this was 4 feet taller at least. So it was all buried in branches and then covered in plastic. And this one went through just like the other, like a rock star. So super success story with that method. That's what I would recommend if we ever have a freak free. The last tree for this video. The avocado tree is alive, but it is the hardest hit of all the avocados that I've had. So this tree had 3 heaters and a kind of tented in area about 6 feet high, but about 10 feet in diameter. And what happened, I believe, is that I didn't have the heaters close enough to the trunk. Also, there was nothing in tight in the center here, so the heat was really just able to go straight up and out, versus if I had pulled something in tighter around the trunk and actually like cut it off. Oh, sorry. I have to apologize. My neighbor's dog is pretty annoying, but so essentially there's nothing showing life on either of the 2 main trunks, but there are these 2 little root suckers that have nice new buds, if it would focus on both of them. No, right now there's a bud right there. Okay, so here's a couple buds. They're just now coming out over a month later. We'll see. All right, you guys, I hope you got a lot out of this video. I learned so much through this last freeze. It was just, even more than the 2018, because they had so many different subtle iterations out there. Just the resiliency of these plants, their ability to survive. Hopefully you learned a lot from the freeze and all of your iterations of what you did. And also hopefully if you had losses, that you can just, chalk that up to experience, to learn from it and improve in the future. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.